One of the North's most original theatres was hit by a dramatic Christmas Day blaze. It had taken a band of enthusiasts years to bring this magnificent piece of history from dereliction back to a working theatre with an international reputation. Backstage is gutted and the superb auditorium seriously damaged. They call this the Norse La Scala. Now it looks like nothing short of a miracle will save the Tyne Theatre.
How about this? Miracles can and sometimes do happen. And here's a perfect example of the impossible being achieved. In less than a year, the Tyne Theatre Opera House fully restored. All this in less than a year. I wonder who was the foreman. Well, you'll be meeting him later. A man who dared to dream the impossible dream. 1867 was the year this place opened, and by golly, if these walls could speak, couldn't they tell us some stories? Triumphs and tragedies, great opening nights and sad closing ones. In fact, the story of the Tyne is the story of theatre itself. Right from the start, everyone who saw this place fell in love with it. Love at first sight. And when you look around this gorgeous auditorium, you can understand exactly why, can't you? Films and television are the most popular forms of entertainment today, but for me, the live theatre's the thing. Well, it's different every time, isn't it? Every single performance is just for you as a member of that particular audience in that particular theatre on that particular night. And that's the frustrating thing about live theatre. Once eyewitnesses have passed on, how can we possibly know what the great performers of the past were like? Those golden boys and girls who strutted their stuff on this stage. Well, within the last 100 years, the film camera has tried to capture some of their magic. Now, scratchy, primitive old efforts, most of them are, but nevertheless, perhaps they give us just a taste of the way things once were. Little Titch, the great burlesque comedian, came to the Tyne in 1898. Harry Ralph was only 4'6", with an extra finger on each hand, but his incredible big boot dance captured audiences all over the world. Good old Sir Harry Lauder was always a big box office draw on his many visits to the theatre. He's singing what could easily become the Tyne's own anthem. Whether it was full-scale grand opera, pantomime, or serious drama, the ever-versatile Tyne served them all in that long-lost golden age of the theatre. Triumphs and tragedies. Every theatre's had them. Here, in 1906, as they brought down the curtain on the first night of Harry Lauder's triumphant pantomime, Aladdin, his leading lady, the much-loved Bessie Featherston, collapsed and died. All sorts of strange and peculiar things have happened here. Now, in the 1880s, stage sound effects were simple but effective and sometimes deadly. Now, they made the sound of thunder by rolling cannonballs like this down a wooden trough, and it had sort of like sleeping policemen let into it. Every time the ball hit one of these, it would bump up in the air and reproduce the sound of a roll of thunder. Alas, in 1886, one of the cannonballs hopped out of the trough, dropped 12 feet onto the head of poor Robert Crowther, the stage carpenter. It killed him. And they do say his ghost still haunts this place.
In 1898, one of my all-time heroes performed here. World champion clog dancer and comedian, the immortal Dan Leno.
Not long ago, I visited Japan. That's where I became a married man. Took a little walk, met a little girl, had a little talk, brain in a whirl. Went to our house, had a cup of tea. In came a father, looked at me, faithfully promised to take my life if I didn't make his girl my wife. A nice old mess I'm in, you see. With Japanese life, I don't agree. A nice old mug they've made of me. I'm mixed up half and half, poor Japanese. My Japanesey wifey gives me nothing else but ching-chang, but I only sling slang, so she gives me bing-bang. All day long upon the tom-tom you should hear her ting-tang. Sing a song, ding-a-dong of Japan. Oh, what a strange place Japan is. You know, I'm so happy to be home because they do everything so differently in Japan. I went there as a tea planter, but the man who sold me the plant, he made a mistake and gave me rhubarb. So I gave him a raspberry. But the man who lived next door to me, he had a ginger beer factory. What a charming man, a charming man. He used to throw all the broken bottles into my garden. And one morning I will never forget, I was out there in the garden, weeding the glass, when suddenly, half a brick hit me on the back of the head. I thought, hello, someone wants to attract my attention. I turned round, and there was my future wife looking over a wall at me. She winked at me. She winked with her ear, not her eye, because they do things very, very differently in Japan. And then she smiled at me. Ah, such a smile. It went on and on and on. You know, she could have eaten a banana sideways, and very often did, because they do things very, very differently in Japan. But what a woman. Ah, I worship the very ground that's coming to her. Because, as I'm sure I've told you twice before, once again, my Japanesey wifey gives me nothing else but ching-chang, but I only sling-slang, so she gives me bing-bang. All day long upon the tom-tom, you should hear her ting-tang. Sing a song, ding-a-dong of Japan. Hello, young man. Tell me, Mr. Leno, what do you think of the Tyne? Ah, absolutely fantastic. You know, it's one of the biggest and the best provincial venues I've played. But somehow, you know, even for all its size, you feel as though you could reach out and pluck the eyebrows of Mrs. Cannybody sitting in the back row of the gods. What about the acoustics? Ah, they're putting traps down for them. No, the sound. Oh, the sound, yes. Well, the singers, like myself, realize that it's as good as La Scala. That's La Scala Milan, not La Scala Scunthorpe. So no worries about the Tyne. Well, just one. This newfangled invention, the kinematograph, the bioscope, people seem to like it. You know, I've a feeling in me water that perhaps one day moving pictures will do away with the likes of us altogether. Thank you, Mr. Leno. Thank you. Peculiar person. The great little Leno wasn't far wrong. When they dropped the curtain after a comic opera in February 1919, they rolled down a silver screen and Tarzan of the Apes swung on. And all this was sealed off and forgotten.
Alas, by the 1960s, the once proud Tyne had degenerated into a notorious porno cinema and a popular haunt for some very dubious characters. then, one day in 1974, the projector blew a fuse for the last time. And this was the fate of so many of our great theatres. Stan Laurel's father built this one, and young Stan did his very first turn here. Next week, it'll be a car park.
13, 1 and 3, 13. 33, all the threes, 33.
The best future a
all
derelict
ones,
theatre could
number
expect
11.
was as a bingo hall.
6 and 8, 68. 31, 3 and 1, 31.
Well, it looked as if the Tyne was heading for exactly the same fate. But then in 1977, along came a bloke called Jack Dixon, and the whole thing changed. Jack, now you look a fairly normal, intelligent chap. What on earth persuaded you to get involved with something like this?
Well, I wanted the lead in Fiddler on the Roof, and I had to. That's the truth. That's exactly the truth, really. I mean, we'd been amateurs and doing shows in different places all over in Newcastle, and everyone brags. You know, if you're an amateur, you think that you've got to have your own premises. And
what did you see, Jack, when you first came in? What did you actually see on that stage?
Well, on the stage, I mean, the cinema screen was there, and we had to get that down because it was a steel structure. But behind the cinema screen, to stop the drafts, they had the scenery made from the East standing there. Now, we didn't know it at the time. We just thought, what the heck's all this stuff?
Which was the 1919 show?
The last 1919 show. And that was still on the stage. And the drop cloth was there with a sailing boat and the whole lot. Yeah.
Eerie.
We've still got the stuff, actually, but... And that was the sort of excitement. I mean, you're not a fool at the time, but you don't know what you're getting into. You know more about the theatre than I do. And maybe you would be slightly frightened to try it.
You're right.
Whereas I don't know anything, so I'm not frightened. There's a lot of good, enthusiastic members who scrubbed and cleaned and didn't know what they were doing it for. They just had a love for something.
If only they'd have realised, Jack, it was to give you the lead in Fiddler on the Roof.
I know. I was good in it as well.
For me, the most exciting part of the Tyne Theatre, not only backstage, but underneath the stage, here in the bowels of the earth. Actually, how far are we underneath stage level here, Jack?
About 25 feet from the actual stage, but you've got a mezzanine level a little bit higher than this, and that's where all the operation's done.
Yeah.
To operate the gear wheels that you see here.
Now, Jack, we can see the gear wheels here now, but I mean, this was another case of time suspended, wasn't it, when you came down here for the first time?
Well, I mean, we arrived at the Tyne Theatre in 1977, and the whole of the place was filled with rubbish, carpenters, old playbills, wood shavings, and one thing that we found later on was a human arm bone, about, you know, this arm bone. I don't know the technical term for it. And we'd had a young group of volunteers clearing the place out. And, of course, when we found the human arm bone, we had to get the police in. So the police came down here in a big gang with shovels, Wellingtons on, and they cleared the whole of this place out for us, looking for more human bones, you see.
You didn't put the arm in the first place?
No, we didn't. We didn't do that. But we found the human bone, and they found it was 150-year-old. It was older than the theatre itself. And these young kids who were all volunteers, in a broad Geordie voice, said, I don't know what all the bloody problem is about this. He says, we found stacks of them, we threw them on the skip. But what it was is, you know, all the machinery, there's the grave trap there, which is commonly called the Hamlet trap.
Yes.
And when they did Hamlet in the olden days, they actually used human bones that they would get from the hospital.
Now, they did do huge stage effects here, didn't they? Jack, in the old days, some of the productions, they did things like, I mean, they raced the Grand, you know, the Derby and stuff like that on stage.
The Grand National, yes, and they had the Grand National, the winner of the Grand National actually appeared.
Really?
Yes, and on stage. And it
Didn't have a leg missing, that wasn't the bone you found there.
No, it was a human bone, that one. But they did the Grand National, the sinking of the Armada with fire ships coming on from different directions, and the stage would be moving, and there'd be hundreds of people. It was very labour-intensive.
And here's some rare film of the original star of Me and My Girl, Lupino Lane, showing us the kind of magic you could create with the simplest of stage machinery. Magic right enough. Within 8 years, Jack Dixon and his company produced a staggering 70 shows and refurbished the theatre. But everything really turned to gold when Placido Domingo arrived to seal the Tyne status as a venue for opera. Then came that fateful day in 1985. The fire had been well away for hours before anyone spotted the smoke and flames. Most people were at home putting their turkeys on. It was, of all days, Christmas Day. It's now a bitterly cold day in January, and the recent gales have just brought tons of bricks down onto what was left of backstage. Under the Tyne stage was one of the few intact examples of Victorian machinery left in Europe, complete with springs, lifts, revolves and traps. Theatre consultant Dave Wilmore had spent years restoring it.
Well, at the moment we're actually dismantling, getting all the bits up into a warehouse to start putting the jigsaw puzzle together. Obviously a lot of the timber was burnt and that'll have to be replaced, but we're now in the process of going through salvaging all the metalwork from the debris that you see about us now.
Henry Irving, Ellen Terry, Sarah Bernhardt, George Roby, they all came here. And later, theatre buffs from all over Europe came to marvel at the auditorium. Now it's soaked in gallons of water. Thankfully, the backstage inferno was held away from the auditorium, apart from a few holes where it broke through the plasterwork. The real damage here is not as bad as they feared, thanks to the safety curtain and the young lad who lowered it after the last performance. He followed an age-old theatre rule and saved the theatre from being a total write-off. It's going to cost at least £1.5 million to restore the Tyne to its former glory. The good news is that the insurance people are coming up with the cash. Over at the workshop, reconstruction of the stage machinery is underway, using photographs, drawings and remains. Everything is to be exactly as it was in 1867. And nothing has been thrown away that can't be straightened out and used again. There's not much left of the front cloths, but their original designs are going to be an essential guide for the new set. We're soon into March, and with the lifting of 3 roof trusses by a 100-foot crane comes the most dramatic and the most dangerous part of the whole restoration. There's 2.5 tons of solid Canadian Douglas fir up there, and there's a 50-mile-an-hour gale blowing. If that truss hits the scaffolding, it could bring the whole rig down, and the men with it. Up top in the fierce wind, the truss turns into a monster. If they have to abort the job, it'll hold the interior work up for weeks.
Terrified, really terrified. I'm glad I haven't got to do this sort of thing every day of the week in these conditions.
What I want to really try and find out is when the safety curtain people come, because the scaffold in the auditorium is dropped in 2.5 weeks' time. There's got to be a scaffold for the safety curtain, people. And we've got to screen off backstage from the auditorium because the paintwork's going to be finished. And all
Jack
the
Dixon
dust
keeps
in
an
the
eagle
bubble.
eye on each
And once the
stage,
scaffold's
and
done,
each
we're
of the
not
many
gonna
skills on the
place
job
anymore.
have to be precisely synchronised.
So it's when are we going to be in a position to put a platform, to put the scaffold on, in that first 20 feet of stage, say.
Back in January, Jack set a deadline for the whole work. 11 months, he said, to curtain up. And he meant it.
One level, if it isn't wide enough, if the platform that's there now isn't wide enough.
Some outsiders reckon he'll never do it. And there are no shortcuts. Every detail has to be accurate. It's a real race against time.
Right, dressing rooms. I reckon we're miles and miles behind on the dressing room.
$27,000 tiles later, the roof is finished. On time. And Jack leads the topping out ceremony.
I think that's spot on.
That's a bit versatile there.
November's not far away. Next week, the painter scaffolding will be cleared so that the seats downstairs and the specially woven carpets can go in. Backstage, all is going to plan. The fire uncovered some fleur-de-lis wallpaper patterns from the 1870s. They've made stencils from them so that these original designs can form part of the new decor. The men also found, hidden under layers of paint over the years, names commemorating some of our great playwrights. Now they're back as they were in 1867. 80 feet up above the gods, the shell ceiling, so important to the theatre's superb acoustics, is nearing completion. And up she goes, the final touch. 11 months of blood, sweat and tears by local craftsmen. They've come to the end of their road, but for thousands of others, the journey's about to begin.
Let me wish the greatest success to this theatre and to all who perform here. And let me say what a great honor it is for me and a privilege to officially open the Tyne Theatre and Opera House. There we are, how about that?